Hello and welcome to Mobilizing the Future of Fleets. This is a podcast dedicated to helping fleet operators navigate the road ahead. I'm Barney Goffer, and today I am delighted to welcome our guest, Heather Bone. She's the ESG Director of Team Global Express, based in Newcastle, Australia. Now, today, our sixth episode will be the first of two conversations with Heather, where we dive into the epic journey of TGE's EV truck deployment. Now, Heather is very much a trailblazer, having led the charge with one of the largest electric fleets in the transport industry. So if you are thinking about your transition to electric, please stick around. This is going to be packed with really valuable insight for you. Let's dive in. Heather, firstly, thank you for joining us. TGE are rightly considered a true pioneer in the arena of EV transition and decarbonisation. But before we speak about that, perhaps you would, briefly explain to us who TGE are and your role in the organisation.
Sure. So Team Global Express, or TGE, came about in 2021 as of the 1st of September in that year. And we are the Australian and New Zealand operations, essentially, of what was previously known as Toll Group. We are one of Australia's largest transport and logistics operator, if not the largest. We have anywhere between 6,000 and 7,000 fleet, and double that again in subcontractors. We have the two ships that go back and forth between the mainland and Tasmania, doing the freight. We're the largest user of the rail network in Australia. We're a huge rail network user. Now we have, I think at last count, about 45 planes. So we do a lot of priority freight as well, anything from goldfish, apparently goldfish go by plane, through to the blood that we deliver to the Red Cross all the way around Australia. So it's a fascinating business. And I've got the luxury of being the Director of ESG, the Director of Sustainability. So I've got, I think, the best job in the world and the hardest job in the world to try and decarbonize.
Definitely. So that's really what we want to get into and start talking about today. So back in, what was it, 2 years ago, back in 2022, you started to lead the project to implement at scale. And it said here, we've called this a pilot. It feels like it's actually a full-blown launch and project, quite frankly, with the scale that you went with this.
Pilot, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So this was to deploy 60 electric trucks from memory. Describe to us what the operation looks like today, and then as we go through that, maybe we can get into the challenges and everything that you had to overcome as you got there.
So the project actually started fairly early on. It was probably within a month of joining the organisation. I went to our CEO, who is an amazing lady, and said, how would you feel about applying for some funding from government to see if they would support us in putting in some electric vehicles? Because the freight task in Australia is incredibly complicated, not least of which we're a massive country. We have a huge number of kilometres and we have a huge payload to take all around the country. So she was incredibly supportive and said, okay, off you go. And that was really the start of it. I started talking to government about what are the opportunities that we could work together in getting some funding to put a large-scale trial in place. And the reason for that was it didn't make sense to me to have one or two trucks. We really needed to be doing this at scale in order to get the learnings out of it and to get the data out of it to say, this is a good idea or a bad idea. But not least of which, I went through an assessment of each of the different depots that this could work at. And I narrowed it down at this particular depot in Western Sydney, primarily. And at that depot, we have 6 wings. And each of those wings has 32 rows. So the conveyor system that delivers all of the parcels around, it's the most amazing spaghetti junction you'll ever see. I had to be able to justify to the team on site, well, I'm going to make these changes. I really actually have to change out one whole wing and those 32 rows. So I basically decided that, okay, that's going to be about 60 trucks, assuming that 2 to 3 are not going to be in every day for they might need maintenance, or the driver might be sick or something along those lines. So I basically said, okay, for me to make it worth your while, for me to change those conveyor systems and all of the postcodes that those parcels are zooming down to, I really need to have 60 trucks and make it worth my while. And so then again, I don't know whether it was working backwards or forwards, figuring out AC, DC charges, what spare capacity we have on site. Then we had 60 trucks and 63 charges. So we've got a bit of redundancy built into that as well.
Yeah. How much of this, interestingly, was sort of gut feel versus the word you used at the start there, which was actual, assessment? You looked at a few sites and you identified this particular one as the target site.
I have to admit there was a lot more to gut feel than there was modelling. Way back at the start, there was a lot more gut feel. My gut feel was, this looks like the right site because the trucks tend to be parked up at night. So that seemed to make sense. The 60 trucks seemed to make sense. And then I would go through to the fleet team and say, does this sound about right to you? And they'd go, yeah, okay, that's starting to make sense. I think the one difference that we ended up in outside of the gut feel, I was expecting to have 30 Volvos and 30 Daimlers. We ended up, because we started looking at the modelling and the weights and the distances, we ended up with 24 Fusos and 36 Volvos. So a slightly different split, but pretty much exactly the same starting point. So it was, even the civils were a lot of gut feel, a lot of fun stuff, we would call it in Australia, because we just didn't know. We didn't have any answers. So all we could really do was say, okay, we're going to have to wing it. We don't have an ADR, we don't have an Australian design rule, we don't have an Australian standard for this, we don't know this, we don't know that. And even Volvo and Daimler today, I think, would look back and say, it was pretty much a lot of gut feel as we went along. That seems to make sense.
Yeah. So 2 years on, everything's running smoothly. The drivers are happy with the trucks. Everyone's onboarded and there's no issues there, right?
Oh, I'd love to say that. We've got all of the infrastructure is in. So we have all of the charges. We have 51 out of the 60 trucks, and the rest of them come over the next sort of 6 weeks or so. So we will have all of the trucks by the middle towards the end of June. But I think it's fair to say that everything that could possibly go wrong has gone wrong with this project, Barney. From the smallest with the drivers to environmental issues on site. I think it's fair to say that it has been a problem child from start to finish. But we have also learned so much that the value of that learning we can now share with the rest of the industry.
Yeah, we were going to touch on that later, actually, and we can get into it now as well, to be fair. One question before we do, perhaps, is now that you've been through this, what did you see as the perceived risks at the time? How many of them turned out to be true? And then what was added on top of that? Because this sounds like it was pretty complicated, right?
Well, I think our risk profile now is completely different to the one that when we went through our risk planning. I was concerned that the trucks wouldn't work for whatever reason. And there's been times that they haven't worked, but not for the reasons we expected. I expected that the charges would not work for whatever reason. I expected a lot more pushback from the drivers than we really have got. Like, the drivers now absolutely love them compared to when we first started. So the problems that we've had have been the complete unknowns, the complete unforeseens, and actually not issues around the trucks and their performance or the charges. So it's come at us from a completely different direction.
Yeah. So now you've taken all those learnings and everything. If you were to go and do this again, or let's say you were going to go to a new business, for example, what learnings would you pass on to an organization that is essentially at the beginning of the journey? What advice would you give them?
You probably have to sit down and map it all out in a much better way than I did to start off with. No, I was really grasping at a lot of things, again, because we just didn't know. Whereas now I would be able to say, okay, on a piece of paper, what's the application of the trucks in that area? What's the freight task that they're trying to resolve? That being the case, what sort of kilometres are they doing? What sort of payload? What's your spare capacity into that site? And what site footprint have you got to do something like this? So I would come at it in probably a much more logical fashion than I did to start off with. Whereas what we've now found is issues that don't relate to the trucks and don't relate to the chargers. There have been software failures. I didn't expect that there would be software failures. I think it's hard to imagine how deeply ingrained the software is now into the package, that total thing that is the truck.
We're talking here about, the vehicle and the charger, and there's this, all of a sudden, I guess you've seen here, this genuine interdependency between the two. And how does that differ to a traditional ICE fleet in terms of, your infrastructure and just being able to turn up, fill up and go? What's different with electric vehicles?
So you can still pull up, top up, plug in and charge. There's no issue about that. But I think what we've really learned and what the data shows us is that's not actually the smartest way to operate the vehicle or the charger. It's when they're working hand in hand at particular points in time that it starts to make sense. So hear me out here. I wanted to put in a load management system. I needed to know that my trucks could pull up, but I didn't. I wanted them to be able to plug in. I wanted to be able to, the driver to be able to walk away. So get out, plug in, walk away, leave it. But I didn't want to start charging at that point in time, which was about 6 o'clock at night, because that's peak load time. So I effectively was saying, I want to manage this load and I want to top up that truck when I want to top it up. So effectively the driver gets out, he plugs it in. There's this sort of handshake between the truck and the charger, and then the truck goes to sleep. We then want the truck to wake up, say 8:30, 9 o'clock at night when we're coming off peak load. And we couldn't wake the trucks up. The trucks were saying, no, I want to charge when I want to charge. You're telling me to charge at a different time. So we've gone through a very different process with the OEMs to say, well, the chargers can only do this. There's a limitation here. In actual fact, your software is the one that we're trying to wake up. It took a lot of argy-bargy and back and forth to realise that was the case. So I think this new way of doing business is quite different. So you've got an ICE vehicle, you've got diesel. There's only so much you can do with your driver style and your payloads and distances to optimise and to be more efficient. Right? Whereas when you look at the data for electric vehicles, you can say, wow, it's actually telling me this. So I'm finding my trucks aren't going far enough during the day. They actually don't need to be topped up all the time. We've had the onboard diagnostics say to us, well, the driver is doing this, and that's actually eating away at the energy in a far different way to the way you usually would for an ICE vehicle. So it really is quite a journey to come along and to take your drivers along that journey.
You're adding it's another quite a serious layer of complexity here, isn't it? Because what you've now got is you've got a multi-energy fleet essentially, and you've got drivers that are drivers driving EVs and ICEs, so they're having to change their behaviour depending on which they're driving. So talk to me about the training side here then for the driver.
It's been an amazing journey with our drivers, and they honestly have been incredibly supportive. The first 2 weeks, even before we signed the contracts, we had to have 2 weeks of union negotiations, so 14 days of union negotiations, and explain to them what we wanted to do. So every morning, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, I was there talking to different shifts, and they were coming and saying, well, what about this? What about this? And I was trying to allay their concerns. And a lot of their concerns were really unfounded. Like, there was a lot of concern that they would be sitting over the top of the battery and therefore would burn their bottom. That was a really big concern for the drivers. The flip side of that was a subcontractor fleet who felt that they might be pushed out of their zones because we were trying to keep the trucks, in the first instance, quite close to the site. So then once we got the contract signed, we started going through, we need to train the trainer and we need to train the drivers in such a way to optimize the energy. And that was taking the routes that were not going to be losing energy. Stop using your heater and air conditioner if you really don't have to do it, because that's sucking down on the energy. Regenerative braking is just so important. And there's a little toggle, I guess, on the dashboard that they can see that their regenerative braking is feeding energy back into the battery. And it's quite an addictive thing to watch when you go, well, I'm doing a good thing. So, you start to have tools with an electric vehicle and with that data that you don't have with ICE vehicles. And you can actually say to them, you braked really well then, but you accelerated so badly because these are fast. So let's tone that back. So now we've been through a huge process, a huge change management with the drivers. And I don't think you can underestimate the driver attitude to this and the impact that that's going to have.
Oh, that's so good to hear, and we hear this in the US and in the UK, and now we hear it from Australia as well. The misinformation out there is sometimes one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. But once you get the driver in the vehicle and they start using it, it's like this light bulb switched on all of a sudden, and they see the benefits and the upside of running an electric fleet. So that's really positive news. One thing I just want to go back to, actually, it's just come back into my mind. At the very sort of start of the conversation, we were talking about the number of charges that you decided to go for and how many you actually went for. So I think did you say 63, if memory serves me correctly? Yeah. And then you've got, 51, and then you're going to have you're going to go up to 60 vehicles.
We'll have 60 trucks.
Okay, great. As far as that is concerned, then, do you know if you're overbid on the charges? I know you wanted to build contingency in, but do you think you might just have way too many? Or do you know or not? Or
It's a great question, Barney. So the reason we did what we did was we had 3 pockets of land on the site that we could use, and 2 distribution boards that we could or 2 main switchboards that we could draw down a spare capacity. What we realised fairly early on was that the trucks really are going to be sleeping at night. So we didn't need to have a huge number of fast chargers and all of that cost, when in actual fact, the material use of those trucks would be parked up at night. So we could have slow AC chargers. Why have a fast charger and all of that cost and all of that impost onto your power bill, when in actual fact you can get away with an AC slow charger? So we have 40 chargers in a grid, so 8x5. We have 7 chargers over by what's called the driver's rest. So it's where the drivers are often, they're actually usually asleep. So the line haul fleet are usually sleeping there during the day. And then at the front of the facility, that lot, that 47 is on one main switchboard. The one at the front, there's 16 fast chargers, or effectively 4x4. And we put the Volvos, or most of the Volvos, out the front there instead of the Fusos, because the Fusos take AC charging. But what's also special about there is that it's actually right near the driver's cafeteria, so that if one of the trucks does run out of energy for whatever reason during the day, or they feel the need that they want to top up, they can come in and park up at the fast charging area, hop into the caf, grab a coffee, have their lunch, do anything like that, and they'll have had that surge of energy through the fast charger. So we really did balance the charges quite differently to what we were expecting. And then so at the front, we've got 1 spare fast charger, and at the back, we've got 2 spare slow chargers. So it's an interesting balance. And I think what I'm finding in the conversations I'm having is people are starting to realise that they don't have to have the be-all and end-all of fast chargers in logistics if those trucks aren't actually being used for periods of time. There might actually be other ways to balance it and top up during the day.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the infrastructure design planning, if we call it that, is like certainly something that we see over here that people are really starting to think on now. And there's some stories of businesses that have gone for this 1-for-1 combination. I've got one vehicle, I need one charger. I've got 10 vehicles, I need 10 chargers. Well, actually, maybe it doesn't play out like that. So when you're thinking about your investment plan and your investment cycle in these things, you might not need to spend the money that you think you need to.
You might be like us, and I actually have lots of spare chargers during the day. So as the site increases its work potential, I can be charging during the day as well, because I've got a battery there that I can charge from if or when I need it.
What opportunities do you see with the current infrastructure that you've deployed now? Where do you go next within TGE? Because I know we're talking about a huge trial here and it's been a great success for you of 60 vehicles, but you've got 5,000-6,000 vehicles. So as a percentage of the entire fleet, it's actually a small percentage, right? Yeah.
I like to think we have learned more than anyone else really about this. So what we're looking to do now is, where can we replicate this? So we've got several depots. We've got probably our top 5 or 6 depots that are large enough to accommodate this. But those depots also have line haul. So we need to start thinking about, what are the line haul applications? What are the prime movers that we can use that will go in certain shuttle runs? So I'm looking to get about 10 of them into one of the other depots, and that's going to be shuttle runs between our facility and the port, and our facility and the railhead. So they're still single trailers, but they're a prime mover that's taking, in the 40s sorts of tons rather than in the 4s and 6s sort of tons. I've got a couple of trials hopefully coming up where we'll have working specifically with these customers about how we'll have one truck here and chargers, and they're actually swapping a bit like ships passing in the night over the Tasman. A big difference for us is going to be in our courier fleet, which is predominant in vans. So until recently, and pretty much until now, Australia hasn't been able to access electric vans, and they're just starting to come in now. And that's an opportunity where we can say to our courier team, the drivers, okay, here's a great lease van. You take it home at night and charge it at night, because that's, the way that couriers work. We'll work with you on making sure that that's at the lowest cost lease. But let's also look at, do you have solar on your roof, so that we can make sure that you're getting the lowest cost of energy? So there's a couple of different, what I call method in my madness sort of projects starting to come out now, that we wouldn't have been able to take that path of adventure until we had some certainty around what we're doing with these 60 trucks. And every day we learn something different. Every day we learn something about the software or the heat or the hills or a driver style, and is feeding into the rest of the business.
Heather, we're going to stop there for today and pick this up in episode 7. I have to say it's been super interesting and insightful with tons of tips for our customers and listeners to consider as they make their own transition towards EV. So it just remains for me to say a huge thank you to Heather Bone, Director of ESG at Team Global Express. And of course, thanks to our viewers and listeners for joining us. And we very much look forward to seeing you on the next episode.